In the last video, we went through the pastoral planning parameters for Sunday Masses. And in this video, I want to just look at some statistics and think of them in terms of those parameters, not because this is going to in any way make any kind of decisions, but just to help us to begin to think through the reality of both our current situation as well as what we're looking towards in the future. And so this leaves things completely open to be able to have discussions within our planning group, as well as within our parishes, to talk about and think about, what this may look like for us going into the future. But it's good to be informed with real data. So the first thing I want to look at is just kind of a summary of what we have with regard to masses currently. So currently, among our 8 different parishes within our parish family, we have 10 weekend masses, and those are being held at 8 different locations. 4 on Saturday, 6 are on Sunday, and they all start from between 5 p.m. to 11:30 a.m. I also have on there the numbers of weekday masses as well as the confessions, but we'll look at those specific things in the future. Here is a map of our 8 parish family. And the numbers next to the parishes represent the mass attendance that was recorded in 2021. So we had just over 1,000 people attending Mass at the various parishes. And since we have a map in front of us, we can think about certain things. Our family of parishes, crosses 4 different counties: Antelope, Boone, Holt, and just barely Tilden also gets into Madison County a little bit too. It spans 40 miles from north to south, from Petersburg to Ewing, and it is approximately about 9.8% of the entire area of the archdiocese. So even though it has a small mass attendance comparatively to especially Omaha, it expands one of the largest areas for any rural grouping. Here on this map, we have a listing of the seating capacity for our various churches. So churches are not all the same size, and they fit different numbers of people. And so when we're trying to decide where masses are, that is one of the things that we may take into account. In planning for the future, it's helpful to look at our trends over time. And so just to kind of give a general understanding, this little timeline here gives some snapshots of how the numbers of masses, as well as the number of people, the number of priests, have changed over time. So if we look back to 2006, in the way our parishes were grouped at that time, there were 9 parishes being served by 4 different priests. And at that time, there were 18 weekend masses and 22 weekday masses. With 9 parishes, 4 priests, and 18 weekend masses, that ends up being on average 2 masses per parish, with each priest celebrating 4.5 masses, as well as 117 people attending each of those masses if you split it up evenly. Right? So that kind of gives you a general idea as to something to compare with both today and into the future when we're setting up the future Mass schedule. So jump ahead from 2006 to 2021, we now have 8 parishes that are served by 3 priests. There are 10 weekend masses now and 15 weekday ones. So with regard to the weekend masses, it's gone down from 2 masses per parish to 1.25 masses per parish. So there's still more than 1 mass per parish in the grouping. What about with regard to priests? So now we have 2.7 masses per priest. So we've gone down in numbers of priests and numbers of masses, and so now each priest, almost 3 masses per priest, just under that. But because our population continues to decrease, and the mass attendance also continues to decrease, and we'll see that here in a moment, we now have 105 people attending each of these masses, even though there are 8 fewer masses than there were in 2006. So when we're looking towards the future, we're going to have to decide what kind of a mass schedule makes sense. But based upon the parameters, we know that our 8 parishes are going to be served by 2 priests. And those 2 priests, the most number of masses that we could do is each priest could do 4 masses at 2 different places. If there were 8 masses total on the weekend, then that would be on average 1 per parish, even though we know that they wouldn't be at each parish. And then that would be 4 masses per priest, with 128 people attending. Now, the 128 people attending, I have assumed that the mass number of people would not have gone down since 2021, and we'll see that that's not accurate here in a moment. But what it does point out is that asking the 2 priests to do 4 each is actually going back up to what previously was expected of priests, but now the priests are serving more communities. So these are just things to keep in mind. So I mentioned that it's 128 people per mass, but that's not quite 100% accurate, as we'll see. Let's look a little bit more detail in what this could mean for people per mass. So in this little table I have here, once again I've got 2006, 2021, and then the future, 2032, for our planning. So the first row are people per masses. So in 2006, there were over 2,000 to be divided among 15 masses within our 8 parishes. And now by 2021, there is just over 1,000 divided by 10. And so that's where you get that final line of 141 in 2006 and 102 in 2021. So if we apply this for 2032, let's say that everybody who's going to Mass now continues to be going to Mass in 2032. And I gave the numbers, the breakdown for 2 priests saying 8 Masses at 4 different locations, or 7 Masses, so one is doing 2 Masses at 2 different locations and the other is doing 3 Masses at 3 locations, or have it divided by 6 Masses, where both priests are doing 3 Masses at 3 locations. And that shows you how many people would then be attending at each of those Masses. And we could look back and compare that to the seating capacities and how that could work with regard to meeting in various churches. But unfortunately, we can't actually use the 2021 Mass attendance numbers. Not if we want to pay attention to the overarching trends that we have. This graph shows us the Mass attendance trend for our family of parishes going back to 1998. So we can see in 1998, there was a much higher attendance rate than there is in 2021. So the trend has been that of a decline. The top one is the total number of parishioners that we have, and the bottom is the Mass attendance. And there's been this widening gap where there are not only fewer parishioners overall, but also a fewer number of those parishioners are attending Mass. So it's been a downward trend. So we can project this into the future. When we do project this, the bottom line, note there's a big dip right at the end for the year 2020, and that was due to COVID. So in forming a trend line, we're going to remove that kind of dip anomaly and just use what the trend was in the years prior to COVID. That way we have what could be perhaps a more accurate kind of trend line. So here is our trend line based upon our data after having moved the COVID dip and recovery. And you'll notice that it's kind of a depressing graph. It predicts a continual decline. If our situation remains the same and we don't make any changes, we don't do anything at all in the way that we live our faith in our parishes, then this is kind of what it predicts occurring, a continued decline. And to go from 69% of people attending in 1998 down to where we are today, or where it was in 2019, 50%, and predicting only 21% of parishioners attending Mass then by 2032. And if you break that down into numbers, have there at the bottom, that's only just over 1,700 parishioners, but only 365 attendees. It's a pretty stark picture. Hopefully, this is not what occurs. But if we go just off of what the data shows, this is what it seems to predict. Of course, human beings and their habits can change, right? We can't 100% predict them. So things could change, but it requires change. And that's one of the things I've mentioned in previous videos, is that we ourselves must change the way that we live out our faith if we expect the trends of our parishes to change. So if we put those stark numbers within the masses that we could potentially do within our future grouping of whether we have 8 masses or 7 masses or 6 masses, you can see just splitting up that 365 people gives pretty small mass attendance numbers per parish overall. Hopefully seeing that, it's not meant to just depress us, but inspire us to do something. Because if we don't do anything, we can see what things could potentially be. One of the other parameters relating to Sunday Masses had to do with the distances traveled, that people were not to expect people to travel more than 20 miles to get to a Sunday Mass. And so here is a map that puts a 20-mile radius around our various communities. And so each of the dots there, for example, the black dot is in Elgin, and so you can see the dots for various other parishes, and the circles you can see cover a wide area that goes all the way to the neighboring groups. The circles reaching all the way up to O'Neill, as well as Norfolk, and down to Albion as well. So this could give something of a visualization as to what a 20-mile radius can look like. So a lot of our parishes that are very close together, you can see just how much the areas that they kind of cover can overlap. And perhaps this could be helpful in assisting us to be able to determine where masses ought to be, depending upon the distances that people might live from those various parishes. Perhaps more helpful within those is to see the actual driving distance, since obviously we can't drive straight from one place to another. So this kind of gives a few of the distances, especially from some of the smaller parishes or those near the edges of our grouping to some of the larger communities, just to see how far various places are from one another. So that's just a few pieces of data that we might utilize to help us apply the pastoral planning parameters to Sunday Masses within our family of parishes.